Okay, so today we want to continue our discussion on Elizabethan literature by looking at Elizabethan nationalism. This is part of the background to the issues in Elizabethan literature. We're looking at the history of the period, the sociopolitical conditioning that made the literature of the period to be what it is when we come to studying it. So Queen Elizabeth I ruled between 1558 and 1600. Queen Elizabeth I ruled between 1558 and 1600. She was a political genius. She was adept at the politics of Europe at the time, politics of England, politics of Europe at the time. This is reflected in how she managed the conflict in her domain. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, England served as the balance of power in Europe. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, England served as the balance of power in Europe, especially when it came to the war between Spain and France. So balance of power here means that whoever England or whichever country England throws its weight behind wins the war. For instance, if there is a war between Spain and France, if England supports Spain, Spain will win the war against France. If England supports France, France will win the war against Spain. So that's what we mean by the balance of power. Elizabeth never married. Queen Elizabeth I never married, but she used her unmarried position to her advantage and to the advantage of the English politics. She used her marriage position to her advantage because she kept everyone guessing. As to her true intentions. She skillfully played everyone. She skillfully played all her suitors. So she skillfully played all her suitors against one another. Remember, these suitors are powerful kings. And probably she knew that getting married would be to the disadvantage of England because of how ambitious some of these suitors were. So at the end of the day, Queen Elizabeth I declared that England alone was her spouse, that she's married to England. After keeping everyone guessing for a long time, she eventually declared that she's married to England. So by this time, it was too late for her to marry. It was too late for her to bear children. So she sacrificed getting married and having children for the unity and strength of England. So by the time it was too late for her to marry and have children, England was strong and united. England was a strong and united nation. Queen Elizabeth I had opposition. Her reign was not without opposition. Her reign was not without opposition. Remember, the politics of this time was linked to religion. So most of our opposition came from the Catholic Church because she was Protestant. Most of the opposition she had came and stemmed from her being Protestant. And so most of our opponents were the Catholic Church and the Pope, as well as the Catholic kings and countries. One of such Catholic countries was Spain. Which took instructions from the Pope to oppose her. In 1570, there was a papal bull. That's like a law, decree, but it comes from the Pope. Papal bull. It's a law, a decree from the Pope. It's a papal bull. That was meant to bring Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, who was Catholic by faith and French by culture, to the throne. They tried to bring Mary Stuart, who was Catholic by faith and French by culture, to the throne. Mary Stuart was Queen of Scots to replace Elizabeth, Queen of Scots. So the Pope wanted to install Mary Stuart on the English throne to replace Elizabeth, who was Protestant. The people rallied around Elizabeth. And because of the people's support for her, she could not be replaced. So at a point, Elizabeth became the symbol of the English nationalism. Elizabeth became the symbol of the English nationalism. Then there was the incident of the Spanish Armada in 1588. There was the incident of the Spanish Armada in 1558. Spanish Armada in 15 AD. We talked about it the other day, we mentioned it the other day. The Spanish Armada is a fleet of warships and was sent by Philip II of Spain to attack England. The Spanish Armada was a fleet of warships sent by Philip II of Spain to attack England. Philip II of Spain to attack England. But these warships were destroyed by the storm, and the English soldiers did not need to do anything. These ships were destroyed by the storm, and the English soldiers didn't need to do anything. This was seen as an act of God and divine mandate for Elizabeth. Even God himself approves of Elizabeth's reign. So now said that even God himself does not want Elizabeth to be removed because God has fought for her. So the political-religious unrest in England persisted despite the Queen's diplomatic gestures, because the other party wanted power too. The conflict was political-religious because politics was linked to religion. And even to today in our society, politics is linked with religion. At the end of the day, Elizabeth ordered the execution of Mary Stuart. Elizabeth ordered the execution of Mary Stuart. To save her throne from constant opposition. From Catholic adherents. Eventually, Elizabeth ordered the execution of Mary Stuart to stop the Catholics from rebelling against her reign in England. It was at this time that the Puritan movement was formed. It was this time that the Puritan movement was formed. Puritan. It was this time that the Puritan movement was formed. The Puritans believed that the church needed to be cleansed of all Catholic influences. This is the same belief of all Protestants, but the Puritans usually go to the extreme. They usually go to the extreme in purging the church from Catholic influences. They emphasize holiness and sacrificial living, denial of the self, and living only for the divine purpose. Those who formed the Puritan movement were those who came back to England after the execution of Mary Stuart. In another development, Europe at this time was engaging in several adventures abroad, traveling to distant lands to bring back treasures. This was the era of colonial exploitation through slavery and looting of treasures in different parts of the world, like the Americas, the Caribbean, Africa, India, and so on and so forth. Most of these expeditions were controlled by the Pope. Most of these adventures, travel, exploitation, were controlled by the Pope. So because the Pope did not like Elizabeth and England, he made sure that they missed out on these adventures. Because it was the Pope's right to divide the lands among the countries in Europe. So the Pope gave the New World to Spain and Portugal without considering England for any share. So England just watched as Spain and Portugal got richer and richer by the treasures that they brought from the New World. There was the founding of the Company of Merchant Adventurers. There was the founding of the Company of Merchant Adventurers. Which began the exploration of Asia and North America. So England began to explore Asia and North America, where they still have influence till today. And because they missed out on the other explorations controlled by the Pope, they resorted to piracy. The piracy consisted mostly of preying on Spanish ships that were returning from the New World with goods and treasures. The piracy consisted mostly on preying on, as attacking Spanish ships returning from the New World with treasures and other goods. They would just wait by the sea. Since the Pope did not allow them to have a share, they attacked the ships and took some of the treasures for themselves. It is said that even the Queen invested in these treasure raids. It said that even the Queen invested in these treasure raids. Treasure raids. Because it was very profitable. But not officially. They will not sanction it officially. And even when you are caught, the state might not acknowledge that they were the ones who sent it. It is said that even the Queen invested in these raids, but accepted no responsibility for them. A case is made of one Francis Drake. A case is made of one Francis Drake. Who raided a Spanish ship with treasures worth £1 million. He raided a Spanish ship on one occasion with treasures worth £1 million. And was knighted by the Queen. Knighted by the Queen. And was made a knight. Knighted by the Queen. On the deck of his ship, the Golden Hand. On the deck of his ship, the Golden Hand. The Golden Hand. He was knighted by the Queen on the deck of his ship, the Golden Hand. Elizabeth ruled for 45 years. Elizabeth I ruled for 45 years. Queen Elizabeth I ruled for 45 years. And the period is named after her. So you always come across the Elizabethan period. In the realm of literature, the Queen was a patron of writers and artists. Elizabeth was a patron of writers and artists. Remember, there's a correlation between the development of literature in any given society and the political disposition to literature in that society. By that I mean that if the government, the king, the queen supports literature, then if the king, the queen support literature, then there will be growth of literature compared to when literature is not supported by the government. So Elizabeth patronized writers like Sir Christopher Houghton, Sir Walter Raleigh, Christopher Houghton, There were not only writers, there were also courtiers. There were not only writers, there were also courtiers. That means gentlemen who served in the court of the queen and wrote during their pastime and wrote as a pastime. In 1528, Sir Thomas Hobby in 1561, Sir Thomas Hobby translated a book entitled Cortigiani. Into English. This book is by Castellion. It's by Castiglione. It's by Castiglione. It is a guidebook for gentlemen in the courts. It's a guidebook for gentlemen in the courts. The book says that the important function of a courtier was to give good and honest advice to the monarch. The important function of a courtier was to give good and honest advice to the monarch. But that those who give good and honest advice will not be well liked. Those who give good and honest advice are not well liked. This makes the life of courtiers problematic in the court, because sometimes truth can kill you, or too much honesty can kill you. Most kings want to be flattered by their advisors. They don't want to be told the truth. And this happens till today in politics. Sir Philip Sidney was punished severely when he tried to advise the Queen against marrying a French prince. Sir Philip Sidney, our great poet, was punished severely when he tried to advise Queen Elizabeth I against marrying a French prince. At this time, Writers look to the courts for grants, rewards, and titles. At this time, writers looked to the court for grants, rewards, and title. Some were successful, many were not successful. So as I've said, the disposition of the political class could influence the development of literature at the time. Some of these writers were disappointed that they were not preferred at court. Someone like John Lilly once cried out. A writer like John Lilly once cried out, 1,000 hopes, but all nothing. And this happened when he could not get the office of Master of Revels. He wanted the office of Master of Revels. It's like Director of Entertainment. Okay? Like personal assistant on entertainment. So when he waited for the office, he did not get it, he became frustrated and said, 1,000 hopes, but all nothing. 100 promises, but yet nothing. So it is not new that politicians would promise you something but fail to follow through. Okay? This is not the first time in human history. It has been happening over and over again. One writer that found favor in Elizabeth's court was Edmund Spenser. One writer that found favor in the English court was Edmund Spenser. But it was not easy at first. Edmund Spenser, the great poet, the writer of The Fairy Queen. So Edmund Spenser wrote Mother Hubert's Tale and Colin Clark's Come Home Again after he was disappointed in his hope of getting court patronage. So you can see the frustration. That made him to write Mother Hubert's Tale to criticize the Queen and the court as a place full of lies and treachery. So he wrote those two works because he could not get court patronage. Eventually, when he wrote The Fairy Queen, he was recognized at court. Eventually, when he wrote The Fairy Queen, he was recognized at court. They even placed him on a monthly stipend of, I think, not less than £50 a year. A yearly stipend, not less than £50 a year. And an office. So there was really no way writers could survive at this time if they didn't have patronage at court. They didn't have nobles that supported their work. So after writing the Fairy Queen, dedicating it to the Queen, because the Fairy Queen is Queen Elizabeth, right? Queen Elizabeth liked the work and sponsored him, gave me a pension of £50 a year. In the literature of the time, the court is seen as a precarious, superficial, and hypocritical place. In the literature of the time, the court is mostly seen as a precarious, a place where you have to watch your step or you die. Precarious, superficial, people are not real, people tell lies, they smile at you, but you don't know that they're not smiling at all. Superficial, they're not genuine, hypocritical. That means that courtiers were not sincere in their dealing. They were ambitious and only cared about themselves. They were selfish. So, true human values could be found in the bush. Given the way the court is, because court is in the town, the city, the center of culture. So writers said we can, since the court is like this, precarious, superficial, hypocritical, we should go to the villages. Because that's where true human values could be found. Go to the bush, the countryside, the villages, because those will be the place where true human values be. But the court is corrupt. The court is depicted as corrupt, because it's full of ambitious, selfish people who only care about their self-promotion or getting the loot, and they won't mind pulling another person down to get it. And so even though they smile at you, they smile at you. Okay? And somehow politics continue to be like that till today. Politics has continued to be like that till today. So remember that at this point in history, writers could not earn a living mostly through writing. I think even in Nigeria, we are still at that point when it comes to writing. It is hard to find a writer in Nigeria who survives only by writing. Okay? So there was a time in English history when writers could not survive exclusively from their writing. One, there was no readership. Until today, we don't have readership in Nigeria. People don't read because they want to read for knowledge. They read because they have been beaten to read. They have been ordered to read. They have been flogged to read. So they read because they want to pass exams. They want to write exams. That's why authors cannot survive in that kind of society. Okay? So writing. So there was no wide readership. There was no wide readership. We didn't have many buyers of books, and we didn't have many publishers. Poetry was written as a courtly pastime by the nobles in the court. Pastime. Like when I'm free, I don't have anything to do, I write poetry. It wasn't as if it was my real occupation. My real occupation is to serve the queen, be a gentleman at court. Be a noble at court and serve the queen. When I relax, I write poetry. So poetry was the most as a quarterly pastime. Quarterly pastime. By the nobles at court. This was how people like Sir Philip Sidney wrote their poems. Sir Philip Sidney. That's how they wrote their poems. And please spell Sir Philip Sidney exactly like that on the board. Otherwise, it's not correct. Writers of lower status, writers like Samuel Daniel, who were of lower status. Samuel Daniel, who were of lower status. Or even Michael Drayton. Michael Drayton. These were the popular writers of the time, but they were of lower status. Sought careers in the civil service as secretaries, tutors. Or they may offer their work to prospective patrons in return for praise. That was how they survived. So lower class writers survived by having additional jobs, like working in the civil service as secretaries to important men, being tutors like teachers, or even offering their work to noble people in return for praise. That means they could dedicate their work to important members of society for patronage. They could dedicate their work to important members of society for patronage. That was how writers survived at the time. But there were cases of patrons who did not reward their writers for these dedications. There were cases of patrons who did not reward their writers for these dedications. The work will be dedicated to the person, but there's no reward. £2 or £3 were given to a writer for a dedication. £2 or £3 were given to a writer for a dedication. For a small book or a pamphlet, for a small book of verse or a pamphlet. So if a writer dedicated a book of poems to a patron, a lord, you may get £2 or £3 as reward. A good example is that Shakespeare dedicated Rape of Lucrece to the Earl of Southampton. Shakespeare dedicated Rape of Lucrece is a narrative poem in the tragic mood by Shakespeare. It was published in 1592. negative 2, the L of Southampton. Southampton. Shakespeare did not seem to have any problem with his patron, but other writers were frustrated by the actions of their patrons. An example is Robert Greene. Here's Robert Greene. Robert Greene was frustrated with his patron. So what he did was to, at the point, Robert Greene dedicated 17 books to 16 different patrons. 17 books to 16 different patrons. That was how frustrating it was. There were some fraudulent practices by authors. They printed several different pages of dedication to different patrons to deceive them, because they are not sure which one will give them money. So they printed different pages of different dedications to different patrons, because they are not sure which one will give them money. Before the Elizabethan period, universities were used mostly in the training of the clergy. Universities were used mostly in the training of the clergy as priests. It's mostly in the training of priests, pastors. But during the Elizabethan era, the universities also trained the gentry and the aristocrats for public service. The universities also trained the gentry, the aristocrats, for public service. But they did not take degrees. So the training of this new set of people brought about a phenomenon that is called university youth. Who constituted most of the writers at the time. These new set of people that are trained for public service became the university wits. They did not take degrees, they became mostly the writers of the time. Examples of the university wits are Thomas Nash, must now. Christopher Marlowe. Robert Greene. And George Peele. And George Peele. These writers were influenced by classical learning, and this is reflected in their work. Elizabethan literature is highly influenced by classical learning. But most of the university wits found it difficult to sustain themselves. Most of the university wits found it difficult to sustain themselves. They were mostly in debt, and some of them were in prison. Were mostly in debt, and some of them were in prison. The population of London grew, and this had impacts on the life in the city generally. For instance, in 1563, London had 93,250 people. In 1563, London had 93,250 people. In Chaucer's time, in the medieval period, London had only 50,000 people. So the increase in the number of people in the city also affected the kind of life that the people lived. In Elizabethan time, the printing presses were in London, and that was where most of the booksellers had their shops. Books were read mostly by the elites. Books were read mostly by the elites, educated, and there were books of instruction like how to be a gentleman, books on romances, religious tracts, and conduct books for men and women. There were also sensational ballads. These were the books that were consumed at the time, but they were mostly consumed by the elites. Books of instruction, romances, religious tracts, conduct books for men and women, how to behave well, and sensational ballads. So the 16th century was the first century of the printed book. In England, books were first printed in the 16th century. At this time, there was no copyright. Authors did not own copyright at this time. Authors did not own copyright at this time. They simply sold their manuscript outright to publishers. They simply sold their manuscripts outright to the publishers. A pamphlet or a small book of poetry could be sold for 40 shillings. A pamphlet or a small book of poetry could be sold for 40 shillings. There were strict laws that regulated printing and publishing at the time. There were strict laws that regulated printing and publishing at this time. All printing must be done in London, and that is in Oxford or Cambridge. All printing must be done in London, that is in Oxford or Cambridge. Everything printed must receive the imprimatur of the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Bishop of London, or their agents. Everything printed must receive the imprimatur and symbol, the seal of authority, of permission, from the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop of Canterbury. Or the Bishop of London. Or their agents. Everything published must be entered on the registers of the Stationers' Company. Stationers' Company. All published materials must be registered. So that means the state took control of publishing. So the strict laws were enforced by the highest authorities in the land. The publishing laws or rules were seen to protect publishers, not authors. Writers could be punished based on what they write, depending on what they write. For instance, one John Starks. John Starks had his right hand cut off for writing a work entitled The Discovery of a Gaping Gull. Had his right hand cut off for writing a work entitled The Discovery of a Gaping Gull. Published in 1579. In the book, he protested the speculated marriage between Elizabeth and a French king. In the book, John Starks protested the speculated marriage between Queen Elizabeth I and a French king. So his right hand was cut off, so that he would not be able to write again. It's reported that he used his left hand to lift up his heart and said, "God save the Queen." And even after having his hand cut off, still have to thank the Queen for cutting off his hand. God save the Queen. Use the remaining hand to say to salute the Queen. And to still say that he's loyal to the government. Other writers went to prison. So writing is a dangerous sphere. And whenever you pick a pen, you start writing, you have to be careful. And you must know the consequences. So don't write without knowing that there will be consequences. So there were writers who went to prison. Some were reprimanded. Some were reprimanded. That means they were warned, stern warning. Others were investigated. So till now, as we speak, writing is a dangerous activity and only engaged by the brave of all people, the bravest of all people. Especially if you want to write the truth about what is happening right now in our society. You have to be prepared because the people who will come after you, directly or indirectly. Okay? Because of what you write. So writing has never been easy. So it was dangerous to put pen to paper. One writer once wrote, it was dangerous to put pen to paper and so unprofitable that it is a wonder any original writing was published at all. So manuscripts continued to circulate in handwriting even up to 17th century, even though we had printing presses in London at this time. Let's just look at art and nature. Art and nature. Elizabethan aesthetics. Elizabethan aesthetics combines art and nature. So art and nature constitutes Elizabethan aesthetics. Art and nature constitutes Elizabethan aesthetics. Art and nature constitutes Elizabethan aesthetics. Art reinforces nature in Elizabethan literature. Art reinforces nature in Elizabethan literature. Nature was a veritable raw material in Elizabethan literature. In fact, there are times that the writers use nature to model human conduct. Use nature to model human conduct. Use nature to model human conduct. Elizabethan literature values intricacy of design. Elizabethan literature values intricacy of design. Intricacy of design. Elaborateness of pattern. Elaborateness of pattern. Elizabethan literature values intricacy of design and elaborateness of pattern. The dances that were popular in Elizabethan times, the dances that were popular in Elizabethan times were cavalries, gallants, amen, and saraband. Elizabethan music was contrapuntal. For music, Elizabethan music was contrapuntal. This means that it was composed of several independent melodies joined together. Contrapuntal music is made up of several independent melodies put together. This was especially reflected in the madrigals. Very reflected in the madrigals. The Elizabethan writers modeled their works after the classical writers. Elizabethan writers modeled their works after the classical writers. They respected the ancient writers in the Greek and the Roman tradition. They respected the writers in the Greek and Roman traditions. They respected the writers in the Greek and Roman tradition. They respected the writers in the Greek and Roman tradition. They learned from them, emulate them, transform their works, and even surpass them, but they were not slave imitators. Some of the writers that they modeled after were or are Homer, Virgil, Theocritus, Cicero, Ovid, Plautus, Terence, Petrarch, castle, and so on and so forth. So you could know which genre they imitated each of the ancient writers. For instance, for epic, they imitated Homer and Virgil. For epic, they imitated Homer and Virgil. For pastoral poetry, they imitated Theocritus and Virgil. For rhetoric, oratory, and prose style, they imitated Cicero. For rhetoric, oratory, and the prose style, they imitated Cicero. They imitated Plautus and Terence for comedy. They imitated Plautus and Terence for comedy. They imitated Seneca for tragedy. Seneca for tragedy. They imitated Seneca for tragedy. They imitated Seneca for tragedy. For sonnet, they imitated Petrarch. For sonnet, they imitated Petrarch. For romantic epic, they imitated Ariosto and Tasso. For romantic epic, they imitated Ariosto and Tasso. For love poetry and erotic mythological narratives, they imitated Ovid. For love poetry and erotic mythological narratives, they imitated Ovid. For love poetry and erotic mythological narratives, they imitated Ovid. An important work in Elizabethan literary criticism is Philip Sidney's Defense of Poesy. An important work in Elizabethan literary criticism is Sidney's In Defense of Poesy. This is a major work. When you want to talk about literary criticism in the Renaissance and in Elizabethan literature, you have to mention In Defense of Poesy by Philip Sidney. It's the most important work on Elizabethan literary criticism that you know. In Defense of Poesy. In Defense of Poesy. You can also call it Apology for Poetry. Sidney's work draws from different literary traditions. That's why we say that the work is eclectic. The work is eclectic. Because it does not follow one approach. It draws from different literary traditions. That's why we say it is eclectic. It draws from different literary traditions. The work states that what is important for Elizabethan literature is ideal imitation. What is important for Elizabethan literature. Because critics usually define the texts and standards of literature at a particular time. So we look to the critics to know what to expect from the literature of our time. And what did Sidney say? Sidney said the Elizabethan literature should go for ideal imitation. Ideal imitation. Sustaining the mimetic criticism that's been in literature for all of the ages, beginning with Aristotle. The literature should also engage in moral teaching. It should also engage in moral teaching. It's not different from what Plato and Aristotle said, because they are imitating the classical writers. Okay? Plato, for instance, said if the literature does not teach the youths good values, banish it from society. Burn it. Because it cannot be in an ideal society. If the literature teaches the youth falsehood, does not teach them the truth, and that literature should have no place in the Republic. That's why literature was banned. So that's the same idea that Sir Philip Sidney brings to bear in writing of In Defense of Poesy. Literature should engage in ideal imitation, moral teaching, and decorum. Philip Sidney defines poetry as an imitation of nature. Philip Sidney defines poetry as an imitation of nature. So you need to remember how nature elevates Elizabethan literary aesthetics. So Sidney defines poetry as an imitation of nature. He sees the poet as a co-creator with God. He sees the poet as a co-creator with God. Because the poet's work reflects that of God. The poet's work reflects that of God. So the poet and God are co-creators. God creates, the poet recreates. God creates, the poet recreates. God creates, the poet recreates. So whenever you see a poet or a creative writer, you need to take a bow. Because before you is a God. Right? Whenever you see a creative writer, you need to take a bow. Right? But before you is a God. Go create something. So poetry is the higher art. Poetry is the higher art. Poetry is the higher art. Because the poet imitates the ideal. The ideal is the best, the possible, what should be, and not what has already happened. Literature is higher than history, because history talks about what has happened. The teacher talks about what could happen, what is possible. My literature is higher than this. Are you listening? That's what Cindy said. There was a tendency in Elizabethan literature and criticism to classify works based on their style. And they had the high, the middle, and the low style. They had the high, the middle, and low style. Elizabethan literature Elizabethan literature was characterized by what is called delight in copia. Delight in copia. Delight in copia. That means the tendency to use more words than necessary for expression. Delight in copia. Delight in copia. That means to be copious with the use of words. To use more words than necessary. Delight in copia. That means abundance of words. Abundance of words. Excessive use of figurative expressions. In Elizabethan literature, you come across excessive use of figurative expressions. They call it poetic figures. Poetic figures. Or tropes. Excessive use of poetic figures or tropes. The literature of the time was ornamental. Literature of the time was ornamental, was decorative. It was written to be beautiful. It was written to be beautiful. It was written to be colorful. So there was a lot of ornament used. Elizabethan literature links poetry with rhetoric. Poetry with rhetoric. Elizabethan literature links poetry with rhetoric. And literature was recognized based on its style. This class of literature had its own style. For instance, the epic was written in the poem style. The epic was written in the poem style. Pastoral will be written in the middle style. The plain style is mostly for teaching. The plain style is mostly for teaching because it's known for its simplicity. The epic is known for its grandeur and refined language because it's written for highly placed members of society. The middle style or the mean style is written for entertainment purposes. But the low style or the plain style is written for education, to teach. Alright? Like I'm teaching now, I use plain style so that everyone will understand. Okay? So we have allegories and symbolic relations in Elizabethan works. Elizabethan literature thrives on allegory and symbolic meaning. Elizabethan literature thrives on allegories and symbolic meaning. It means that a typical work of art can have more than one level of meaning. That's what allegory is all about. A typical work of art can have more than one level of meaning, the surface meaning and the deeper meaning. The surface meaning and the deeper meaning. Works could be symbolic because their meanings point to other things. Outside the work of art. The Elizabethan worldview is that of a God-ordered universe. The Elizabethan worldview is that of a God-ordered universe. Where all beings are hierarchically related in a long chain. All beings are hierarchically related. So it's based on hierarchy, from God to the least creatures. So this is called the great chain of being. The great chain of being. It begins with God and down to the lowest of creatures. And everyone has their duties to perform. So the great chain of being involves God, the angels, human beings, animals, even dust. Let us look at Elizabethan poetic conventions, modes, and genres. Elizabethan poetic conventions, modes, and genres. We can define literary conventions as patterns that have become habitual. We can define literary conventions as patterns that have become habitual. Patterns that have become habitual. Arousing certain expectations from the reader. Arousing certain expectations in the reader. The poetic convention in the Elizabethan period and literature are the pastoral, heroic, lyric, satiric, elegiac, tragic, comic, convention. Pastoral, heroic, lyric, satiric, elegiac, tragic, and comic are some of the forms of Elizabethan literary convention. In poetry, you could have the epic, tragedy, sonnet. In poetry, you could have the epic, tragedy, sonnet, verse, epistle, epigram, hymn, masque, funeral elegy, among others. Elizabethan literature placed the epic at the pinnacle of the genre system, and pastoral was placed at the bottom. That means in Elizabethan literature we value comedy, in Elizabethan literature we valued epic as the greatest genre, and pastoral is the least valued genre in Elizabethan literature. So in this, they deviated from the classical writers, because Aristotle said that the tragedy was the highest genre of literature. But the Elizabethans valued the epic more than tragedy. And the least valued genre in Elizabethan literature is the pastoral poetry. So take note of that. The important writers of the epic in the Elizabethan period were Edmund Spenser and John Milton. Important epic writers in Elizabethan era and literature are Edmund Spenser and John Milton. Edmund Spenser wrote The Fairy Queen, while John Milton wrote Paradise Lost. Edmund Spenser wrote The Fairy Queen, while John Milton wrote Paradise Lost. So both writers followed the pattern of Virgil in the Roman classical tradition, who started by writing pastoral poetry before going on to write the epic. Both Edmund Spenser and John Milton followed the pattern of Virgil in the classical period, who began by writing humble verses in pastoral poetry before going on to write the epic, to perhaps justify the claim of starting small, so that you can become great. The word Etim was associated with pastoral poetry. The word Etim was associated with pastoral poetry as a poem of leisure and humble contentment. Leisure and humble contentment. There were satirical poems, but they were considered to be low in style or plain in style. Pastoral poems used plain or low style. Writers who practice pastoral poetry include Joseph Hall and John Marston. Most of the writers wrote pastoral poetry anyway. Elizabethan lyric poems were short and were concerned with praises to God in the form of hymns. Elizabethan lyric poems were short and were concerned with hymns to God in the form of praise. There were odes. There were odes which celebrated people and occasions. There were odes which celebrated people and occasions. O-D-E-S. There were odes that celebrated people and occasions. These odes had exalted tone, elevated language, emotionally charged. They were emotionally charged and had complex stanzaic forms. They were rich in apostrophes. Then we had the Epithalamium. We have the Epithalamium. And the Epithalamium as an example of ode practiced in the 16th century. They were called wedding songs. They were called wedding songs, Epithalamium. So Epithalamium is a type of ode that celebrates a wedding, a type of poem that celebrates a wedding. Spencer wrote a poem entitled Epithala Mew. Most of these wedding songs were modeled after Horace, modeled after Pindar from the classical period, and Callimachus. Modeled after cartoons, other ancient poets. Sonnets were popular in the Elizabethan period. Sonnets were popular in the Elizabethan period. Its conventions were established by Francisco Petrarch, who lived between 1304 and 1374. The sonnet conventions were established by Francisco Petrarch, who lived between 1304 and 1374. The sonnet was introduced into England by writers like Thomas Watt and Henry Howard. Sonnet was introduced to England by writers like Thomas Watt and Henry Howard, also known as the Earl of Surrey. So we're going to pause there for today. When we come back, we'll continue exploration, the background to Elizabethan literature. Have a very beautiful, beautiful day.